All right, thanks everyone for joining. Good morning and good afternoon. Today we'll be presenting on Rebounding from COVID, exploring payment trends and recovery strategies. My name is Lena Liu and I'm a marketing manager here at Marqeta, and I'm excited to be your host for today. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we begin the webinar. We'll be holding all of the questions at the end, so if you have a question, feel free to type them into the question function in your console and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. Also, we'll be sending out an email with a link to the recording afterwards. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to our presenters to introduce themselves and kick us off for the webinar.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lena. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Farnaz Irfan. I am the head of product marketing here at Marqeta, and it's my pleasure to be with you today. It's also our great pleasure to have one of our customers with us today, Alex Sklar from Payability. Alex, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Farnaz, and thank you for having us. I'm Alex Sklar. I'm the head of business development and partnerships with Payability. I've been in fintech for about 7.5 years and was in public accounting before that, and spent pretty much my whole career around small and mid-sized businesses. At Payability, we provide friction-free financing to e-commerce sellers, both those selling on marketplaces and those selling on their own website. I'm excited to be here and dig into our topics.
Wonderful. It's great to have you. All right, so we wanted to kick off our webinar by looking at some payment trends that have been pretty prominent prior to COVID, but with COVID, we've seen them accelerate significantly. One of these trends is demand for cashless transactions. We saw this prior to COVID, but we are really at a tipping point today where many merchants who in the past were insisting on having, or would only accept cash transactions are now insisting on having contactless payments. The second trend is what is called in the industry invisible payments. And invisible payments is when the payment instrument is completely taken out of the picture. That could be cash, check, or your payment card. A great example for that is Amazon Go. We have some of those convenience stores, Amazon Go, here in San Francisco, but essentially they have made it very easy for the shopper to go and pick up the items that you're interested in. It tracks everything that you pick up, and you walk out the store with a checkout-free experience. The other trend in this invisible payment is around voice commerce, and we've seen a few inquiries coming into Marqeta where connected cars or smart cars are trying to implement voice commerce through APIs, right? So soon we're going to be at a place where, I'm doing a drive-through and I don't really need to reach out for my wallet or for my card to pay for that item. I could just, go through that drive-through without really involving any payment instrument. And then the last one here is around conservative spending, which is true for both businesses as well as consumers. Unfortunately, with the economic downturn, people are becoming much more thoughtful about how they spend and where they spend. And, that's one of the trends we see where businesses are trying to optimize their cash flow and be very thoughtful about their spending. Alex, any comments, any other observations you've seen in the market?
I think you hit on some of the major themes that are happening right now. I think especially, with the pandemic in place and COVID, as little touching things as we can, I think is becoming a pretty common theme. And it coincides directly with an emergence of fintech companies rethinking how cash's place in transactions. If we can feel secure that the money is being transferred, do we need to physically touch cash? Do we need to physically see merchants? And I think we're going to get into a lot of that, but I think the trends that you're pointing out are what we see as well.
Absolutely, great points. So with those trends, we wanted to frame the rest of our conversation and the rest of this webinar around solutions. As we are looking at more of a cashless society, as we are looking at a digital-first society, what are some opportunities for merchants and marketplaces to put in place so that they could survive COVID, they could keep their doors open and increase their sales? The other segment we want to hit on is lending. with the global economic downturn, what are some possibilities and solutions that lenders can put in place for the market? And then last but not least, we wanted to look at B2b payments, vendor payments, supplier payments, and what are some ways that we can think through to optimize that cash flow. And as people are thinking, to be more conservative and more thoughtful around their spending, what are some areas they can optimize their payments in B2B segment? And with that, let's start with merchants and marketplaces. Alex, this is an area you're very passionate about. You have a lot of experiences in this area, so love to get your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, so I think, when we're talking about a cashless society, and moving to a cashless digital world, we're really talking about removing friction. And it's something we pride ourselves on at Payability, but it's something that a lot of other companies are doing as well, is, trying to remove friction in every part of a transactional process. And that's traditional brick and mortar stores starting to have an online presence. A lot of times people thought of e-commerce as a secondary channel, or maybe something that would get you down the road, or, at times it was an afterthought, because I think for brick and mortar stores, they still always relied on foot traffic, and a lot of their metrics, the way they even think about leases, and all that kind of comes down to foot traffic. And what we're seeing now is all that, quote unquote, foot traffic is now happening online. And so we're seeing companies moving online for the first time. We're seeing companies that did have a smaller online presence start to double and triple down on their online offerings. And we're seeing companies that maybe had their own website start to explore different types of marketplaces, whether those marketplaces are B2C or B2B. As all this is happening, we're seeing all these different payments companies and financial providers and everything in between be able to create that friction-free environment, making it even a better experience than actually being in store. And so, I think when we're talking about, marketplaces in general, so there's multiple ways to sell on e-commerce. You can sell on a marketplace, you can sell on your own website, and through things like EDI, you can still drive traffic through a website, and then basically work with more traditional marketplaces that, it's still that same type of electronic data transfer. But essentially, we start with where the consumer's shopping, and as businesses and merchants, we want to be able to supply that demand. I think everyone knows some of the biggest marketplaces like Amazon and Walmart, but what we're seeing a lot of too is a lot of niche marketplaces popping up, kind of compartmentalizing parts of a marketplace. So a great example of that is Chewy. They focus exclusively on pet and pet supplies. And we're seeing, like Newegg used to be very consumer electronic focused. We're watching them broaden out a little bit. There are very specific niche marketplaces like Goat that are pretty much only for sneakers, and Reverb that's for guitars and music. It's essentially, it comes back to the demand. Where are people shopping? So most people go to Amazon, and they're, that's where you do kind of like a rote search. You're searching for something high level like paper towels, right? But you already know what you're looking for. What we're seeing in a lot of other marketplaces that merchants are taking advantage of is where does that top of funnel discovery happen? Is it happening on Google? Is it happening on Pinterest? Is it happening on a marketplace that you're going to specifically to look for other items? And so we're seeing a lot of merchants try out these different channels and see if it works for them. All the while, this is all happening with different payment providers making it even faster to be able to buy, whether that's one-click shopping, whether it's something like Shopify Payments, where you've bought something from one Shopify store and all you have to do is enter your email and get like a two-step verification to buy again. We're watching all these things happening in real time, and with a tremendous amount of investment going into e-commerce, because I think a lot of people have been bullish on e-commerce for a while, but now as we're seeing, e-commerce, I think, made up somewhere around 10% of retail sales. During the COVID period that we're in right now, it's north of 20%. And I think what people are realizing is, with your store able to be open 24 hours, 7 days a week, there's really no limit to the opportunity. So I think we're going to see investment into marketplaces, into e-commerce, well into the next decade. And it's, the pandemic has really been the tipping point for that, and kind of like a catalyst, but not necessarily the reason. It's just opened a lot of people's eyes to what they can do through e-commerce channels.
Absolutely agree. A lot of people are trying to put a web front into their business, and the ones that do have to keep their physical stores, as I go and into a restaurant, I'm surprised still that some don't have contactless payments, but they're fully aware. They're trying to provide easier ways for their customers to draw that traffic in. To your point, you draw your traffic in through Google, or if you're a web store or a online marketplace, through different means. But at the same time, for physical stores, you do need to draw traffic and create that trust that you have the solutions that your consumers are looking for. So on that note, contactless payments is an area we do see pretty much a lot of interest actually with COVID. We ran a consumer survey just a few weeks ago. This is going to be a report that we will publish and make sure that we send it to everybody. We'll send a copy to you. But some of the stats were super interesting, and like to share them with you. So the first one is how people's behavior is changing as part of COVID. A lot of people are motivated by COVID to change how they pay at the point of sales. This number has gone up since last year that we did the survey the same time. It is now 64% of people that are paying with a mobile wallet. This number was about 38% last year, so significant growth on use of mobile wallets. And then lastly, what's interesting is that people will continue using, or think that they will continue using, digital wallets even after a pandemic is over. So as consumers are demanding more contactless payments and digital wallets, there is an urgency on the issuers or program providers, card program providers, to provide the best solution to be able to push provision their cards into digital wallets. The technology behind push provisioning cards into digital wallets is called tokenization, and it's essentially when you, underneath the cover, by tokenizing cards, you are replacing all the sensitive information about the card with a token and storing that in a digital wallet. And as you can imagine, that does have a lot of benefits, one of which is security and protection, that protection for the cardholder, where my card number is not exposed anymore to the general public or to the merchant. And it also gives me as a card holder, and the card gives the card issuer payment continuity. I'm never going to lose my digital wallet. I'm able to access it from any device at any time that I desire, even if I lose my physical wallet. So it provides that level of payment continuity for issuers to always allow their cardholders to have access to their payment instrument. We've seen the interest in tokenization mostly from the on-demand delivery segment, and those are the drivers who are going and picking up an order. Today, they're more and more paying with a digital wallet. There are still some physical cards out there, but we are seeing most of our on-demand delivery customers are requesting and are moving towards a tokenized type of cards. The same is true for expense cards, for loyalty cards, and obviously the consumer cards, the debit and credit consumer cards. Now, in terms of the technology, Marqeta's tokenization not only works on the cards that are issued and processed through our platform, but also the cards that are issued through other platforms. So if you already have a card program, you can use Marqeta's tokenization as a service to push provision your cards into digital wallets. And that's essentially the type of service that we're providing for JPMC. We have a beautiful quote here from JPMC, from their head of commercial payments, where they are tokenizing their commercial line of cards into digital wallets and emphasizing this use case and the importance of it, obviously, at times of COVID for their cardholders. Now, moving on to point of sale lending and point of sale financing. This is a very popular strategy for merchants and marketplaces, in which you are providing as a merchant a seamless, frictionless experience for your shoppers. You give them the option to pay in installments instead of paying in full. We pulled some data from our point of sale lending customers. Obviously, this data is aggregated and is anonymized, and we have pulled this data from 2019 all the way to now. You can see that the trend for point of sale lending is on the uptake. It is rising. It's pretty popular, as I said, but there was a dip around the COVID when COVID started to hit in March and April. And the dip is mainly on travel because travel expenses, travel spend is one of the larger ticketed items, and a lot of people use point of sales to finance that. So that dip happened around the beginning of COVID, but now the trend is moving forward and upwards. The second graph is segmented by the merchant category code. And those are some interesting areas. Obviously, around the holidays, you see an uptake in apparel and electronics. And around COVID, the beginning of COVID in April, May, we started to see kind of unusual items being purchased by point of sale type of financing, including beauty products and home decor and construction. So pretty interesting data points. Alex, what are your thoughts on these graphs?
Yeah, so I think these charts kind of go right in line with what we're seeing. So, I think when we think about point of sale financing, right off the bat, we want to think like, what was the original point of sale financing? And it was credit cards, right? That was, because again, if we were going to go back to removing friction in everything we do, when I'm at the point of purchasing something, that is the best time to actually be able to finance something, whether it's with a credit card or point of sale financing, because I've already, whether I'm in the checkout, if I'm online, or, whether I'm in a store, I'm at the point where I'm ready to make the purchase. So now it's just a question of how am I coming up with the funds? So where we're seeing such a big dip in, travel, it's pretty obvious with the pandemic, with shutdown orders, with the lack of travel, with different countries, basically closing down their borders. I think it makes sense to see such a strong dip there. And what it coincides with as well is when you're going to use point of sale financing, you're usually looking at a larger ticket item. It might not always make sense to finance a $50 pair of jeans, but when you're talking about taking a cruise, when you're talking about taking a week-long vacation, and you're talking about taking the whole family and you have maybe 4 or 6 people, that creates a large ticket number. So those are usually items that are going to be more likely to be financed. So obviously with the pandemic coming, it's really not shocking to see that take a large dip. But to some of the other categories, it goes right in line with what we're seeing with e-commerce and marketplace sellers. And if we think about, a lot of the ramifications to COVID, I think that makes sense. So if we think about beauty, if we think about apparel, if we think about consumer electronics, for a lot of the country, people have started turning home, people are working from home. A lot of people had to build home offices. Some families had to build 2 home offices. Some families are building 2 home offices and 2 classrooms. And so there you would see, all of a sudden we need more computers. We need more desks. We need more lighting. We need a lot of these things to create these other home environments. Typically, those are more expensive purchases. Computers, webcams, those are all the types of things that you would actually want to finance because they're expensive, right off the bat. But 2, when you're looking to finance something, you're usually looking to have that financing kind of go in line with the duration of what you're using. So if I'm buying a desk and I'm going to have this desk for five years, I don't mind paying that off over 5 years because I'm going to actually have a longer use time and it makes more sense. Similar to like the way a mortgage works, paying it off over 30 years and you're going to live the rest of your life in that home. When we look at things like apparel, I think a lot of times people thought like, why would apparel go up? I'm not going to meetings anymore. And what it really is too is we're all on camera all day long now, or a lot of us are at least. So we're seeing people, they're buying more makeup because they're actually wearing more makeup now that we all have HD cameras. And, it's a lot more zoomed in than you would be if you were sitting in a meeting 10, 15 feet away from someone at a conference room. And, everyone's seeing us from the waist up. So we're buying apparel because, a lot of us are staring into cameras all day. We're staring at each other and we're starting to notice things about like, are you wearing the same shirt 2 days in a row? And these are all the little things that I think are almost counterintuitive when we first think about like spending during a pandemic. But when we actually break down like what our individual daily lives look like, it kind of coincides perfectly with what we're all doing in our individual lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I only look at shirts and tops these days, much less. And yeah, I 100% agree. It is very interesting. So moving on to solutions on point of sales, Alex, continue.
Yeah, and so point of sale, as we were just touching on, it is it's something that's been around, but it's getting a lot of new flavors. And again, if there was a central theme here, it's almost like removing friction in every way you can between the e-wallets, point of sale financing. I have someone who's ready to buy something. I do not want to create any friction into how they're going to pay for it. I want those options to be readily available. I want them ideally to be in the checkout. In a perfect world, they're as easy as one button. And so we're seeing a lot of B2C point of sale options come through. You listed some of the biggest ones here on the right-hand side: Affirm, Afterpay, Klarna, and Sezzle. And what it really does is it allows the merchants to have basically larger tickets and be able to sell more, because now financing is not the pain point, or really having the available cash to pay for something is not the issue preventing you to be able to buy. And so, different point of sale lenders have all different types of metrics that they use for how they're going to provide financing. Maybe it's FICO based, maybe it's based on like some alternative data that they have. But essentially what they're saying is, I know who's going to sell this product, and I know who's going to buy this product, and I want to create that transaction. And there's all different kinds. So we have installment loans, and that's basically I'm paying the same amount every month over a prescribed period of time. We have basically split payments, where I'm buying something, I'm not taking on a loan necessarily, but I'm breaking it into, four or more easy payments. There's an entire world of, essentially lease and rent to own that is now getting brought into the digital age. And those are typically used for credit challenged applicants or very high risk applicants for products that, in the event of a default, they could actually be repossessed. So in the case of home improvement, that would be something like an HVAC system, where maybe you wouldn't normally have been approved, but because this is something that we could, the financer could take back if for some reason you defaulted, they're able to provide you financing. Whereas paving your driveway obviously isn't something that would fall into that bucket. And there are some interesting complications when we talk about point of sale financing, because now I'm really creating a situation where I have to underwrite twice. I have to underwrite the applicant, because that's the person who's eventually, going to be responsible for making the payments. But I also have to underwrite the merchant, because I need to make sure that they have a good track record of delivering that product. Because if I'm the financial institution, I'm the one purchasing this product, and the liability is going to go to the consumer to pay it back. But the liability also goes to the merchant to actually deliver and keep up the promise of what we've purchased. What we're also seeing is point of sale financing entering the B2B world. When we're talking about a business, we now add a bazillion times the complication to that, because I need to look at the owner of that business and see if they have the type of character that I think I'll get paid back from. I need to look at the cash flow of that business and see if they can actually support the payments. I need to look at the amount of receivables that are already being occupied that business to see if they've already essentially pledged out, future incoming cash flow to other sources. And so I'm looking at that from the buyer. And then I have to do the same thing again on the seller. I have to make sure, can they actually deliver this product? Is there a period of time where if they delay the delivery of that product, that person will cancel because I've already paid for it? Is that
Mm-hmm.
product going to be in good condition, or what is the likelihood of a chargeback or return? And so we're taking a lot of the ideas that B2C uses, but we're adding a little more complexity to it. Where the upside is, and this is what we're building here at Payability, and what some other B2B point of sale providers are creating is, it's an ability to diffuse risk. So let's say we want to provide $100,000 in capital for someone to buy inventory. How do I know they're actually going to buy that inventory? What if they take that capital and they do something frivolous that's not revenue producing? Because anytime you're a business and you take on outside capital, you want to make sure that's going to a revenue producing function of your business, or else you're creating a burden. When you're leveraging capital and you're putting it to work in a revenue producing way, then you can basically exponentially increase your business by leveraging the outside capital. On the consumer side, it's a little different. You're not always buying a hot tub or buying a flight to, Hawaii to necessarily do more tomorrow. But when it comes to small businesses and medium-sized businesses, and businesses of all sizes, really, if they're able to use the money effectively to grow their business, there's almost no limit to how much you can provide them. So that's where, point of sale, B2B point of sale actually allows you to diffuse risk. If I know I'm making that inventory purchase for you, then I can feel a little more secure and I might be able to lower my rates. I might be able to take on more risk, provide more capital than I was originally intending to, because we know that we're channeling it into a revenue producing product. Whereas if I just give someone, a lump sum of money with no restrictions towards it, I have to then do a deeper underwriting that you know how to use money effectively to grow your business, because I don't get to, control is a little bit of the wrong word, steer and guide you in the right direction of how to use that money. And that's where, B2b point of sale starts to really become exciting for, business capital providers.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Alex. That was very insightful. Appreciate it. Moving on to our next part of our presentation. Before we move to lending, we wanted to touch on fraud, because fraud has been significantly impacted as part of COVID. We've all seen the rate of fraud has gone up, unfortunately. So a couple of observations around fraud is, one area of exposure has been around fraud detection algorithms, because these algorithms were trained by data prior to COVID, and people's behavior changed during COVID. We do see an older generation of people, for example, are starting to shop online. People are moving to, countryside. They're not at their exact location. They would always shop. We're also seeing new sources of payments coming in the picture with the stimulus checks and, with the payment protection plans. People shopped in panic. A lot of websites went up that were fake, and they were selling masks. So a lot of fraud detection algorithms for cardholders have been thrown off as part of COVID, and that's one area of exposure that we've seen, unfortunately. The second area is around shopping online, and we see, and as the data shows, more and more people are actually shopping online today, because you really don't want to get out of your house in many cases. That's what the data shows. For example, here we see from MasterCard, where 50% of their transactions in April was coming from card not present, and that's a category for online and mobile types of shopping, as opposed to last year, which this has been a 40% increase for their purchases. So a lot more people are coming online, and it's a lot harder to control the online transaction, because you really don't see that person in store. You always have the person, the card is chip enabled. The person may have does have an ID that they could verify themselves, but it's a lot harder to verify the identity of the person when they're shopping online. So a couple of solutions around these two trends that we've seen companies implement is, one, to complement your fraud detection algorithms, you can always put in place, very, hard, fast rules around your spend. And that's what we call dynamic spend controls. These could be things like merchant whitelist or merchant blacklist of where do you approve or where you don't approve. It could be, velocity controls. How many transactions, and for how much do I allow on this card, given a window of time, within a window of time. And beyond that, it might be fraudulent, and I don't want to approve and authorize those transactions. It could also be, live data. If you are tracking the geolocation of the card holder because the card is in a digital wallet, you can use that to validate and identify that transaction and approve it upon that geolocation verification. So those are some ideas we've seen companies use, dynamic spend controls, to control their fraud and build another layer of protection for their spend. And then the other area is around how do you control and verify the identity of the person who's shopping online. So it's much more of a newer trend, but we have some of our customers who are enabling apps and building apps that verifies the biometric of that person who's shopping online, their facial recognition, voice recognition, and things of that nature. And they pass that to us. They pass that identity and verification of the identity into our card issuing processing platform. And only upon those verifications and the validity of the person, they decide to approve or decline a transaction. And that's enabled through a product we just launched a couple months ago called Marqeta 3D Secure. All right, moving on to lending. Alex, this is an area that you're an expert on, and given Payability's role in lending in the market, love to get your thoughts and really learn more about that from you.
Yeah, and so I think we've seen a tremendous increase in fintech providers and other new types of capital providers. And the reason I say capital provider as opposed to lender is there's all different types of structures out there, and we can see some of them on the slides right here, and I'm happy to dig into a couple of them. But typically, on the highest level, you have different types of financing agreements. When we're talking about like fintech providers, it really breaks down into a couple buckets. So, there's a future receivables purchase, which is what we do here at Payability, and then there's a loan. And people always get them confused, and it's because they both look and feel like a loan. It's a lump sum of capital that's going to be paid back over time. And I think what's helpful for people to kind of frame it is, a loan is basically you're giving someone capital and they're making a promise to pay you back. Whereas like a cash advance or a future receivable purchase is, they're the financial provider is projecting what you're going to do next month in sales or the next 2 months in sales and giving it to you upfront in a lump sum and then collecting it over time. Because they haven't made a loan. They're basically purchasing future sales at a discount and providing it to you upfront and then taking a small portion of sales over time. And it's something that, I talk about a lot because I think everyone should actually know what the differences are. Because I think, in our normal nomenclature, the word loan always kind of comes out in lender, but like there are different nuances to each one. But to kind of break down what some of the ones we have here, so something that is new to COVID were the PPP loans, and that's the payroll protection plan loan. That was set up by the government, issued and run by the SBA, and a lot of different fintech providers basically came in to help small businesses here. Some on the origination side, some actually on the lending side. And what these were designed to do is basically provide capital to businesses to essentially cover like 8 to 10 weeks of payroll. There was also the EIDL, which was essentially also run by the SBA. That wasn't so much for payroll protection, but to cover maybe outstanding liabilities that COVID made it hard to keep up with. Things like leases, things like other loans that maybe the company had out, essentially to keep the economy fueled and going. So with the PPP program, we saw a tremendous influx and a tremendous amount of demand. What was amazing was watching these fintech providers that provide capital to pizzerias, capital to restaurants, capital to retail stores, literally in the course of a week or two, flip a switch and be able to change their whole model to be able to provide these PPP loans. And I think it speaks to, why fintech is so interesting and why it's so compelling is, when you do build this technology, you can run different models through it and be able to just create more opportunity and help other businesses. When we're talking about other types of lending technology that we're seeing out there, we're seeing some really interesting things happening with some, large traditional institutional players. Recently, Marcus by Goldman Sachs. So Goldman Sachs has been a very large investment bank for, well over 100 years. They created a fintech company within the bank, and they call it Marcus, named after the original founder of Goldman Sachs. They originally started out in the consumer space, taking on those like Lending Club and Upwork and Upgrade and Prosper and all those consumer lenders that were originally started as peer-to-peer, but had kind of moved into more of a traditional consumer lending model. So Marcus kind of came into that space and did a great job. They have probably one of the best online consumer loans out there right now. And now we're seeing them move into the small business space. They recently did a deal with Amazon, and there's chatter about them doing some deals with some other marketplaces. And there it's because they have a lot of capital. They see the amount of growth that's happening in small business right now, and they're saying, why wouldn't we want to be involved in this too? This is a lot of fintech companies, frankly, like ours, are stealing a lot of market share from these large banks, especially when you add in things like, we are a Marqeta customer. Our Payability seller card is powered off of it, and that creates an e-wallet. So, it creates these situations where that money might be sitting in an e-wallet for 2 weeks instead of sitting in a bank account. So it's going to make a lot of these banks want to say, how can we get that market share back? And so I wouldn't be shocked if we saw a lot more acquisitions and investments by some of the traditional large institutions. And then we also have things like microlending. So Cabbage was in microlending. Square has been a lot in microlending. Square pretty much got their, not their start, but you know, Square is a tremendous model. They basically flipped merchant acquiring on its head. It used to be that you would offer capital to sell someone the processing, and Square made the acquisition of selling processing so easy. They're basically using the capital now to retain the customer. But they were taking on risk that no one would touch for a long time, like food trucks. Here, if I have my Square fob, I can read all your information programmatically, and then I can basically project out what I think you're going to do next couple months in sales, and it allows me to create my underwriting models. So we've seen them do, very micro stuff, and there's other providers out there that are also doing, micro loans and things like that. Then you have things like factoring, which is what our flagship product, Instant Access, was built off of. And that's essentially, you've already made a sale, you're being paid on terms, and we want to get you paid faster. So traditional factoring, one of the biggest use cases in traditional factoring was typically trucking companies. Gas is expensive, for lack of a better term. Diesel gas is even more expensive, and when you have a truck with, hundreds of gallons in it, you can imagine what that bill looks like. And a lot of times for trucking companies, they didn't have enough gas to actually complete their next delivery, but they had already, completed the previous one. And that's where factoring companies would come in and say, we'll pay you 90 or 95% of your invoice to give you capital now, and we'll take on the risk of actually collecting that invoice. That way you can buy gas and keep the truck moving. What we've done, and we actually own the patent on it, is we've turned that into a product for e-commerce sellers. So a lot of marketplaces pay on terms. Amazon being a great example, they typically pay every 14 days. So what we've done is we've said, well, first of all, we listened to the market and we heard what the pain points were. And those pain points were, it's really hard to scale my business only getting paid twice a month, and I have a lot of demand. And so what we did is we turned that net 14 into net 1. And we do that by taking old-fashioned factoring and giving it a real-time modern digital spin. And there's other companies that do factoring as well. We're probably the biggest on marketplaces, but there's always going to be competitors because you're solving genuine pain points. And then when we talk about lending via cards, this is a whole new world that really, I think people's heads would have spun if you talked about something like this 10 years ago. And we do this through our Marqeta, our Payability seller card powered by Marqeta, and we're seeing other providers do this too. So we want to provide you capital. How do you want to spend it? We want to make it as easy as possible. So what if we take, a corporate Visa debit card and we load that card so you can spend it as easily as you want? Again, back to that central theme of removing the friction, right? So that's where we've seen great success with our seller card is, a lot of times in e-commerce, there's all sorts of e-commerce sellers. There's people who own their own brand. There's people who manufacture their own brand. There's people who private label. And then there's this, there's drop shippers, there's resellers, there's wholesalers. There's this whole world of retail arbitrage, which is essentially buy low, sell high. And what we've seen is a lot of people are buying low, selling high. They're buying at Dollar General. They're buying at Walmart and then reselling it somewhere else. And so for us, being able to put that capital on the card for them and then be able to give them perks, things like 2% cash back. And I know we're going to touch on that in a little bit, like some of the incentivization. But for us, there's so many components to it. Like one of them is just when we're at a conference and people see our Payability seller card, they go, we put them right on the table because it draws people into the booth and they go, wow, that's amazing. So you guys issue these cards? And we go, well, we don't issue them, but we put the capital on them. And it creates a lot of opportunity because people can conceptualize it immediately. Whether they ever actually use the card or they move the money via ACH, the card signifies to them capital. And that's been a big win for us. And then the ways we can incentivize those who use it is it's a big win for our customers as well.
Absolutely. Agreed. 100%. It carries your brand and the data behind it. I know you guys are very data savvy, and that's also super, super critical to see those patterns and optimize your offerings to your merchants.
And it lets them manage their cash flow too. So, speaking of the data, we provide all our customers with like a full reporting portal where they can see all their transactions. And I think, when I asked my team before I came on here, I think 20% of all the money we deploy is actually spent on our seller card. And a lot of the customers who do that like it because they get to see their transactional reporting as well. And it allows them to do, better cash flow management as well.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Thank you, Alex. That makes a lot of sense. So the last part of our webinar is around B2b payments. And this is an area that today most organizations, especially in the small, medium businesses, as you can see with the survey that we've outlined here by level, they're still using manual processes or paper processes for their B2B payments. That's ACH or check. And unfortunately, with COVID, this has been harder because the workforce, the back office workforce who is enabling and building these processes is, unfortunately, some of them have been impacted. And the ones that are not impacted are working from home. So following a paper process, while working at home is pretty impractical and pretty hard. At the same time, the corporate buyers, in these companies, in small, medium businesses, they do want to optimize their cash. You want to pay earlier so you can get, those kind of discounts, early discounts as you pay for your suppliers and for your vendors. So a lot of these corporate buyers are turning into AP automation platforms, AP automation tools, and AP automation platforms are looking to automate this process of paying suppliers and vendors, and they are turning into payment cards to enable that. And these are companies like AvidXchange, like Bill.com, and many more in this space where cards have an advantage for AP automation platform because it does provide a revenue stream coming from interchange, from the network's interchange, and that's something that AP automation platforms can share with their customers or really use it as another source of revenue. But also, more importantly, is the flexibility that cards provide. And I have just some examples of what we've seen from our customers on the slide. Really, the sky is the limit, but we've seen various levels of implementations on cards. Some of it is, one is, for example, single-use cards where you can associate a card for just one particular invoice, and it's a virtual card and it disappears afterwards. It's only for that particular supplier. Or you can really build virtual card programs that make payments to certain suppliers on an ongoing or recurring base. You also have the ability to build travel and expense cards and put spend limits on them. For example, what are the merchant category codes that this travel and expense card can be used at, or what is the daily limit that it should be limited to? Another interesting one is ghost cards, which I've heard a client talk about it, where it's essentially, this is a supplier card that's associated with a certain vendor, and all the employees in that, in that account can go ahead and use and charge that supplier using this ghost card, for example. Just some examples on how you can really use, optimize your cash flow, pay ahead of time, pay in a more automated way using cards instead of using ACH and check, and also provide a lot more flexibility around these B2B payments that could be useful around COVID and optimizing your cash flow. And with that, we had other ideas and thoughts we wanted to share with you. We figured we'll just put a few of them on a summary slide or on a conclusion slide to share with you. A couple of these are coming from you, Alex. Love to hear your thoughts on these.
Yeah. And so, I was kind of talking about it a little bit earlier, but this is really where we see so much benefit from having our Payability seller card, and why we've loved our relationship with Marqeta is we use it a lot for, customer loyalty. And so right off the bat, it's great for branding, right? Everyone gets our card, they see the Payability seller card. It's a beautiful card. We got to, design it. And it just looks crisp. It's nice. Everyone likes it. It draws people to the booth. It gets people going, and it signifies capital, right? People see something that looks like a credit card, even though it's a corporate Visa debit card. It looks like a credit card. People automatically associate it with money. They know why they're coming over to the booth, and we do a lot of marketing with it. but it also allows us to create incentive programs. So right now, we actually give all of our customers 2% cash back when for every dollar they spend on the card. And we do that as, one, we're always trying to provide as much capital as we can with rates as cheap as we can. And one way for us to lower the rates is by having them use the card when they spend and being able to give them cash back on the card. It also allows us to run promotions. So right now for Shopify sellers, as an example, Shopify sellers do a lot with Facebook ads to drive demand. So to be able to help Shopify sellers grow, we've said, well, we'll do 5% cash back if you use your seller card for Facebook ads. It's easy for the merchants. They can just put that card on file. It's nice and easy. They don't have to think about it. And if they if they use the capital through the card, we can give them 5% cash back. We've done some other incentive programs where if they use the card with one of our partners, we can give them a 20% cash back. We can give them basically a 20% discount on the partner's product. And there we're using the card. That way we can track it back to them, because our partners don't always want to give discounts to everybody. They have a great relationship with us. Because of that relationship, they're willing sometimes to give discounts way above and beyond what they would normally give. And the way for us to always ensure that it is the right person is, it's very easy. Use your Payability seller card. And that allows us to be able to load money onto the card for them. Obviously it's attached to the e-wallet, so every dollar that's available is also available on the card. But it allows us to create a lot of different types of incentive programs. It creates a lot of customer loyalty. We've had some internal studies that our customers who use more than one of our products are just way stickier. I don't know the exact number, so I can't go into it, but it was exponential. Like I remember when looking at this chart and it was like, great. So what are we learning here? Well, we're learning when someone uses more than one of our product, that they have a tighter relationship with us. And more times than not, that second product was them using the seller card. And, for 100 different reasons, we love the card over here. It creates, it allows us to do all sorts of different spend management reporting back to our customers in the form of insights. It allows the customer to be able to compartmentalize their business spending. Here with the seller card, we're providing you capital. In the case of the factoring, we're providing you the sales you've already made. It's your money. We're just providing it to you faster. And now using the card, you can put your business expenses on the card and already start to compartmentalize those business payments so they don't affect your personal card and things like that. And for that reasons and more, we've found tremendous success with the card.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. Always think customer first. Last but not least, I would add just a few notes on building empathy with your customers and really providing that level of trust through other services. It may not be your core service or core product, but being able to be resourceful during COVID to help your customers out. And we saw this done by a lot of vendors providing tips on how businesses, especially small, medium businesses, thrive in these tough times, or how could they get government grants and mini grants and relief funds. So with that, we love to jump into questions, but Lena, did you want to leave us with a few resources?
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex and Farnaz. Those are really great insights. And it's obvious that COVID-19 has changed the way that we make payments. It's forcing businesses to rethink their strategies and pivoting. And thanks for providing all of those great ideas and idea starters. Just a couple additional resources that we'll actually be sending out after the webinar, but some things that Farnaz touched on tokenization and digital wallets, also our 3D Secure product, and then just some materials around how other customers are leveraging these products to make their payments more efficient and safer during COVID. So now let's jump into some questions. And if you do have a question, please feel free to type them in the question function in the console. But we actually had a couple questions submitted during the registration, so I'll go ahead and start with those while we wait for the live ones to come in. The first one was, what changes are we seeing in the chargeback landscape? Should we expect higher rates, and for how long? How can we reduce these effectively and dispute the ones we do receive?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Lena. And thank you for sending those questions ahead of time. because of fraud, unfortunately, chargebacks and disputes have gone up. We saw some of those changes also in our own programs. Initially, it was around travel. So, as we mentioned, March and April, a lot of people had international travels or local travels. They had to cancel them. And Visa, MasterCard, fortunately, had very accommodating policies around that. So that was great. We also saw trends in merchants and marketplaces where a lot of people were panic buying. So unfortunately, a lot of websites that were, for example, selling masks were coming online, and we saw those charges that needed to be disputed. So recommendation on that would be to educate your customers to really pay attention to things that are called, for example, social engineering. I personally see things myself in ads that come to through my feed. They know, for example, the type of shoes I like, and not COVID related, but sometimes once in a while I see like, hey, these shoes are cheaper, not a lot cheaper. So I am interested to find out more, and it kind of got me a little bit. I started dropping a few of them into my basket and then realized the URL was completely different. So educating your customers is pretty critical during these times, because unfortunately there are a lot of people that are taking advantage of this situation. And then compromised cards is another area where physical cards are a little bit more exposed into being stolen. And in that sense, we do not see that in tokenized cards and cards that are provisioned into digital wallets. And then we did cover some of these fraud controls earlier. So to prevent chargebacks and essentially fraud, make sure that you have more of a multi-layer fraud protection around your card and the identity of the people that you approve. And then lastly, I would add here, we've seen some of our customers do take advantage of like chatbots, where like smart chatbots, to file those cases and use process automation to file those cases, so that you don't have humans going through all these disputes as they come in. So you can at least like cut your cost of program costs around chargebacks and disputes. Even though you do have to pay for that dispute, you're not paying for the program costs as well. So some tips here on that one.
Great, thanks, Farnaz. Our second question is actually for Alex at Payability. How has Payability responded during COVID? Was there anything you needed to do to change your business since the pandemic?
Yeah, and thank you for that. I think it's a great question. It's one that we've gotten asked a couple times. So I think it really, to start, it was kind of a tale of two COVIDs. So in the beginning, when the pandemic first hit, it was all about PPE and making sure that people had the necessary items they needed. And for us, working with e-commerce customers and marketplace sellers on the largest marketplaces like Amazon and Walmart and others, for us, we really felt it was mission critical to make sure that we were providing enough capital for all these businesses to not only stay in business, but be able to keep up with the demand. So we are a technology company first, and we do everything in the cloud. So we're all able to work remotely. So we are based out of New York City. I'm in New York City right now. I think a lot of people, were asking me, because I'm in partnerships, I talk with people all over the country, and they were saying, like, what's going on in New York? Are you guys okay? And I used to kind of start by telling everyone, there are a lot of businesses out there really suffering right now. I'm inconvenienced. And I wanted everyone to know that like, we are up and running. We are providing more capital than ever during the COVID time to be able to make sure that all these mission critical companies that were providing all the PPE, were providing things like, just home goods and necessities and groceries and all these things, that they were able to be well capitalized to keep providing these goods with a tremendous amount of demand. And so that was kind of the beginning of COVID. And then, in this second half of COVID, where it's not as much of a PPE focus, and it's now just, a lot of people are buying on e-commerce, things that we were talking about before. We're still providing tons of capital to e-commerce sellers to grow. We're seeing a tremendous influx of new people coming online and new people looking to grow businesses. And As far as what we've shifted, really what we did have to tighten up a little bit as far as some of our underwriting requirements in the beginning. But we've been able to ease back off of some of those tightened requirements. We did, we basically had to put some additional reserves in place. We had to tighten up some of our risk models to make sure that we could be there to be able to help all our small businesses. Like a lot of companies, we're all working remotely now, but I think there are a lot of people working remotely right now that can kind of say the same too.
All right, next question. Which digital wallets does Marqeta work with, and how long does tokenization and moving to a digital wallet take?
Mhm.
Arnaz,
Great
you want to take that
question.
one?
Sure. Yes, we have Google Pay and Apple Pay, and soon Samsung Pay is in building. It's soon going to be G8. It doesn't take long. Tokenization is essentially push provisioning, so you could, as soon as you issue the card, push provision that card number or the token for it into a digital wallet. Or if you have an existing card, you can always manually enter it. So it just takes a matter of seconds or minutes to provision a card into a digital wallet.
Great. Next question. Do you think we're moving to a post-plastic era? I'd love to hear both of your perspectives,
Yeah.
actually.
That's interesting. Yeah, I can chime in with a couple of thoughts. I mean, this is almost the same as cashless. I would say to some extent, yes, more cards are being virtualized, and more programs are virtual programs, and people like that, especially for B2b payments, or when the branding is not as significant or important for those payments. We see that plastic kind of is not as critical to have, but nonetheless, I think, Alex, you were talking about your booth at the show, so it does carry an element of brand. So I don't think it's completely going to go away, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think we'd all hope that plastic goes away as far as plastic, but not necessarily the card. For environmental reasons, I'd love to see all cards made out of something like metal or something that is not, as detrimental as plastic itself. But, I think while there are reasons to, think that plastic is unnecessary, as the card is just a physical form of the same account ID. I still do believe, based on what I was kind of saying with the conference, I still believe that people will continue using plastic as it kind of connects them with the money that they're spending. I don't know that we'd ever want to move to a world where you don't have some reminder of what you're actually spending. And, physically touching something does trigger a different part of your brain. It's why usually you can remember things better when you physically write them down in a journal as opposed to just typing them. People can make a million arguments for why plastic is going to go away. I don't know that I see it. I still think that there are things that people like to have in physical real life, and we see it all the time when people talk about our card. They want that card sent to them. We, in theory, can issue them a card and never send them the card. And everybody asks us, when am I going to get the card in the mail? And we tell them, you can use the account before you have the card. People want that card. People show us their card. People come to the conference, see us at a booth or a trade show, and they pull that card out of their wallet and say, oh, I've got my card. And I think there is still, even if it's nothing more than a novelty, I still think there is some aspect of it being physically real that people still do appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely. It would be nice if they make, we start to make biodegradable cards. Then we can.
Or a bamboo or something like that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right, this next question's for Alex. Does Payability work with international sellers?
We do. It's if you want to work with e-commerce, you gotta work with everybody. So right now we do work with international sellers all over the world, pretty much every country that's not listed on an OFAC list. And the one caveat is they have to be selling in a US based marketplace. So you can be in Germany if you're selling on Amazon.com, but you can't be in Texas selling on Amazon.uk. And we also, through a partner of ours, are able to provide them foreign currency exchange services as well, so they can even receive the the money back in their home currency.
Great. And one last question. Can Marqeta tokenize just Marqeta cards, or can they tokenize any card? Farnaz?
Sure, great question. Any card, it's a new service for us. We've been tokenizing cards since 2016 for our own programs, meaning customers that have issued and processed cards on our platform. But you have the ability, if you have another issuer processor, you can use the tokenization technology as a service and tokenize those cards into digital wallets without having to issue or process your cards on the Marqeta platform.
Great. So that looks like we are actually up on time. So for the questions we didn't get a chance to address live on the webinar, we actually have a list of all of them coming in. So we will be sure to follow up with you guys through email. Just want to say thank you to both Alex and Farnaz for taking the time today to talk about this topic, which is so critical for everyone. And thank you for the great perspective and ideas, and appreciate everyone taking the time to join the webinar.